In November 2004, some of the most advanced military sensors in the world tracked an object that still has no universally accepted explanation. It wasn't seen by a single witness or captured by a blurry cell phone camera. It was detected on Navy radar for days, observed by experienced fighter pilots during an intercept mission, and later recorded by an infrared targeting system. 20 years later, the US government still cannot say with certainty what the object was. Some believe it was a highly classified military aircraft. Others argue it was a combination of radar errors, optical illusions, and misidentified objects. And then there are those who believe the encounter points to something far more extraordinary. Whatever the answer may be, one fact is beyond dispute. The Nimitz Incident permanently changed how both the military and the public think about unidentified objects in our skies. So what actually happened over the Pacific Ocean that morning? And why has one routine training exercise remained one of the most debated military encounters of the 21st century? The story began several days before anyone ever saw the object. In early November 2004, the Nimitz Carrier Strike Group was conducting pre-deployment exercises roughly 100 miles southwest of San Diego. Among the ships escorting the carrier was the USS Princeton, a guided missile cruiser equipped with the AN/SPY-1B Aegis radar system, one of the most sophisticated tracking arrays in the US Navy's arsenal. Around November 10th, an operations specialist aboard the Princeton named Kevin Day reported something on his scope that didn't behave like anything he recognized. Multiple objects were appearing at altitudes above 80,000 feet, then descending to near sea level in a matter of seconds, before hovering in place. Commercial airliners don't do this. Neither do birds, weather balloons, or any aircraft in the Navy's own inventory. Day's first assumption was equipment malfunction. Radar systems, however advanced, are prone to false returns, and a sudden cluster of physics-defying contacts is exactly the kind of thing a technician is trained to distrust. So the crew ran diagnostics. They cross-checked the returns against other systems aboard the ship. They ruled out interference, software errors, and known sources of radar clutter. Their contacts kept appearing. Over the following days, the pattern repeated itself enough times that Day and his colleagues stopped treating it as a glitch and started treating it as a problem that needed an answer. By November 14th, that answer took the form of an intercept order. 2 FA-18 Super Hornets, call signs Fast Eagle 1 and Fast Eagle 2, were airborne on a routine training mission when the Princeton radioed in. The pilots were told to abandon their exercise and proceed to a new set of coordinates for what the controller described as a real-world tasking. Commander David Fravor, the commanding officer of Strike Fighter Squadron 41, the Black Aces, led the flight, with Lieutenant Commander Jim Slate in the back seat as his weapons systems officer. Flying as his wingman was Lieutenant Commander Alex Dietrich, herself a relatively junior aviator at the time, with her own weapons officer alongside her. Before the jets were vectored in, the Princeton controller asked an unusual question. Were they carrying live weapons? They weren't. Their missiles were inert, used only for training. As the two aircraft descended toward the assigned coordinates, they expected to find whatever the Princeton had been tracking at around 20,000 feet. Instead, they found nothing in the air at all. What they did find, on the surface of the ocean below, was a disturbance. Fravor described an area of white turning water, later compared in size to a Boeing 737, as though something large were moving just beneath the surface. There was no boat nearby, no debris, no obvious explanation for turbulence of that scale in otherwise calm seas. And then, above the disturbance, they saw it. A small white, oblong object hovering with no visible wings, no rotors, no exhaust, and no apparent means of propulsion. Fravor would later describe it as simply a small white shape moving erratically above the churning water. Dietrich, watching from above, described its motion as unlike anything she had seen an aircraft do, comparing it to a dropped phone bouncing unpredictably from one surface to another with no discernible pattern or trajectory. Fravor decided to get a closer look. He began a descending turn toward the object, intending to fly beneath it and assess its size and behavior. What happened next is the detail he has repeated in every account he has given since, under oath before Congress and in television interviews alike. As he descended, the object began to rise to meet him, as if mirroring his approach, moving in a way he would later describe as deliberate rather than random. When the object reached an altitude in front of his jet, it did not simply fly away. According to Fravor, it accelerated instantaneously, crossing his flight path and vanishing from sight in what he estimated as less than 2 seconds. That alone would have been the entire encounter, an inexplicable but ultimately unrecorded event, the kind that fills debrief rooms and gets quietly dismissed. But then the Princeton radioed again, and what the controller said turned a strange sighting into something the Navy could not simply file away. The controller told Fravor that the object had appeared on radar, at the exact coordinates the pilots had been assigned as their combat air patrol point, a rendezvous location roughly 60 miles from where the encounter had just taken place. The object had covered that distance in under a minute. If the radar data was accurate, that implied a rate of travel far beyond the capability of any known aircraft, human or otherwise. It also raised a more unsettling question. How could the object have known, or predicted, the one set of coordinates the pilots themselves had been given for a routine rendezvous? By the time Fravor and Dietrich reached the CAP point to investigate, there was nothing there. The object, once again, was gone. The two jets returned to the Nimitz. Their debrief, according to those present, was met with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. Fravor's seniority and reputation as an experienced aviator meant his report was taken seriously rather than dismissed outright, but there was no established Navy procedure at the time for formally investigating an encounter like this. Word of what happened, however, spread quickly through the strike group, and roughly an hour later, a second flight launched from the Nimitz to see if the object, or objects, could be found again. This second sortie included an FA-18, equipped with something the first flight didn't have, an advanced targeting forward-looking infrared pod, or FLIR, capable of recording high-resolution thermal video of any target it locked onto. The weapons system officer aboard that aircraft was Lieutenant Commander Chad Underwood. Vectored toward a radar contact roughly 30 miles out, Underwood managed to acquire the object on his infrared display and began recording. He never saw the object with his own eyes. His focus, he later explained, was entirely on keeping the camera locked and the tape rolling, so that intelligence analysts back on the ship would have something concrete to examine. It was Underwood who, watching the oblong white shape on his infrared screen, coined the name that would eventually define the entire case: Tic Tac. The footage Underwood captured that afternoon, roughly 90 seconds in total, would later be designated FLIR 1. It shows a small, bright, elongated object against a gray sky, rotating slightly as the aircraft's sensor tracks it. Near the end of the clip, the object appears to accelerate away and out of the frame. It is important to be precise about what the video does and does not show. It does not capture the close-range encounter that Fravor and Dietrich described, the object above the whitewater, the mirror descent, the high-speed pass. It captures a separate, later observation of what may or may not have been the same object, viewed only through a thermal lens from a significant distance. What the video does provide is something pilots' testimony alone could not: sensor data, footage that doesn't rely on human perception, and a shape and motion signature that trained analysts could later study frame by frame. Underwood would go on to describe the object's movement as inconsistent with the normal laws of physics, though he was careful to note that pilots can misread what they see, whereas thermal sensor data is a more objective record of what was actually there. The case might have ended in a Navy filing cabinet were it not for that dual layer of evidence: human testimony from multiple trained observers, corroborated by independent radar tracking from two separate platforms, and reinforced by recorded infrared footage. It would sit largely unexamined by the public for more than a decade, until investigative reporting in 2017 revealed the existence of a Pentagon program that had quietly studied the case, and the Department of Defense formally released the FLIR 1 footage in 2020, confirming its authenticity. In the year since, 3 broad categories of explanation have been proposed, and each one accounts for part of the evidence while struggling with the rest. The first is that the object was a secret piece of American technology, a classified aircraft or drone undergoing testing in the training range. This explanation has an obvious appeal. It requires no exotic physics, only a program the pilots weren't cleared to know about, but Fravor has pushed back on this directly, noting that as one of the most senior officers in the strike group at the time, he would ordinarily have been briefed on any classified test operations occurring in his own operating area. He says no such briefing took place, and no military testing program has ever been publicly connected to the incident. The second explanation points to a foreign adversary, a rival nation testing an advanced aircraft off the coast of California, either as a demonstration or an act of intelligence gathering. This theory is difficult to dismiss outright, since foreign incursions into American training ranges are not unprecedented, but it runs into the same problem as the first explanation. No nation has ever been shown to possess technology capable of the acceleration and altitude changes described, and no wreckage, signal intelligence, or diplomatic fallout has ever surfaced to support it. The third explanation is more mundane, and in some ways the hardest to fully rule out, that some combination of radar artifacts, atmospheric distortion, and the limitations of human perception under stress produced a misleading picture. Radar can generate false returns. The eye, especially at altitude and under the adrenaline of an unusual intercept, can misjudge size, speed, and distance. Some analysts have proposed that the churning water Fravor described could have had a mundane cause unrelated to the object above it, and that the object itself may have been something more familiar, misperceived at a distance. This explanation accounts for a single anomalous sighting reasonably well. It has a harder time accounting for 2 independent radar systems tracking a contact over multiple days, a controller reporting the object at a specific, pre-briefed coordinate, and an infrared sensor separately recording a matching shape and behavior. And then there is the fourth explanation, the one that requires no technical caveat and generates the most public fascination, that the object was not of terrestrial origin at all. It is worth being precise here because the pilots themselves have consistently resisted this framing. Fravor and Dietrich have both publicly said that they don't believe they encountered little green men, and have described themselves as reluctant participants in a story that has taken on a life beyond their own testimony. What they have said, under oath and on the record, is narrower and in some ways more unsettling, that whatever they saw demonstrated a combination of acceleration, maneuverability, and lack of visible propulsion that exceeded anything in the American arsenal, and that they have never been offered an explanation that resolves the discrepancy. That, ultimately, is what has kept the Nimitz Incident alive for 2 decades. Long after most military anomalies fade into filed reports and forgotten debriefs, it isn't a single dramatic claim. It's the alignment of independent evidence that shouldn't, by ordinary standards, all point in the same direction. A week of radar tracking that multiple technicians tried and failed to explain away, 2 trained pilots whose accounts has never wavered or contradicted each other, a disturbance in the ocean with no identified cause, a radar reappearance at a coordinate the object had no evident way of knowing, and infrared footage, verified by the Pentagon itself, showing a shape and motion no one has definitively matched to any known aircraft. Every official body that has examined the case, from Navy intelligence to the government's more recent UAP task forces, has reached the same conclusion Kevin Day reached at his radar console in 2004. Not that they know what it was, but that they can say with some confidence what it wasn't. And in the gap between those 2 statements, the mystery of a single November afternoon off the coast of California has remained open, waiting on evidence that 20 years on still hasn't arrived.